please send us a note using the chat box. We will have time at the end of the program to answer some of your questions. If we are unable to get to your question, we will be sure to post answers along with the recorded webinar after the event. You'll also notice contact information for the presenters and me. Please feel free to contact us directly with specific questions. Before I turn the program over to our presenters, I wanted to find out about how many story times your library hosts each week. So just for fun, we wanted to do a quick poll. You'll have a few minutes to respond, and I'll share the results with you in just a few moments. As we get started, I wanted to share a little bit of the background of the program. As is often the case, the idea for the program evolved from a conversation completely unrelated to early literacy. At ALA in 2010, we hosted a breakfast for a group of librarians to discuss the space changes and new furniture needs in their libraries. The conversation started on topic, but quickly became a discussion around early literacy, and despite our best efforts to get back on track, stayed on early literacy for most of the time. As we listened, it became clear there were two major factors driving this keen interest. First, Every Child Ready to Read had raised the awareness but also created some confusion on exactly how to implement an early literacy program. Second, the Great Recession had dramatically increased program attendance and the expectations of those attending. Armed with this new knowledge, we started thinking about how we could help libraries solve this problem. Through research, additional conversations, and based on our experience, it became clear that there was a need for a Storytime program that addressed three critical issues. First, it needed to be research-based and built on early literacy and early childhood education best practices. Second, it needed to foster deliberate parent and caregiver involvement beyond the library. And third, it needed to captivate both the child and the caregiver. At this time, let's take a moment to check out the results of our poll. From your responses, we can see that about 53% of the attendees are hosting 0 to 3 story times each week. About 9% are hosting 7 to 10, with the remainder hosting about 4 to 6, and a few hosting over 11 each week. That's pretty impressive to host over 11. So as I was saying about the pillars of the program, as we were building on these pillars and the research, the Very Ready Reading program was developed as a complete early literacy solution that can be used as a standalone program or integrated into a library's existing program. With these pillars in place, we began searching for the experts we needed to bring the program to life. We started by working to find the perfect way to captivate children and parents, and we found it with Eric Carle and the Very Hungry Caterpillar. The bright graphics and universal appeal provided an ideal image to invite participants to join in the program. Our next step was to secure the early literacy and early education experts we needed to create the content of the program. And once again, we found the perfect match. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Sue McLeaf-Nispecka has over 30 years of library experience in children's services. She has a master's degree in education in early childhood and a master's in library science. Currently, she runs her own consulting business. Dr. Pam Schiller is a curriculum specialist, freelance author, and speaker. Dr. Schiller is the author of 6 curriculums, 21 children's books, and more than 30 teacher and parent resource books. Sue, I'll pass the control over to you, and we can get started.
Okay, thank you, Matt, and welcome everyone. Okay, I am trying to get this to advance here. One moment. Okay. We know that research has repeatedly shown how important parent and child interactions are in the development of early literacy skills. And we all know that sharing books and language with children from birth is crucial. But even well-educated parents sometimes do not know how to share books with their newborn children. They'll say things like, he just wants to throw the book, or she won't even look at it, she's looking all around. Or probably the one that you've heard the most often, I know I have, is she just wants to chew on the book. Well, in our manual, we give tips for handling all those challenges, or how to tell parents to handle those challenges. So what is this program all about? The Very Ready Reading Program is designed to assist librarians in providing parents and early childhood educators with the tools and the techniques that they need to encourage adults to engage in early literacy experiences on a daily basis. If done in ways that are consistent and meaningful and purposeful, this will prepare children for future reading success. Now that brings me to our 7 days, 7 ways philosophy, which is a very important part of this program. And I'm going to talk about this more later, and all of them will show on the screen, but right now I'm just going to mention them. What are the 7 ways parents can share early literacy skills with their children? By sharing books, sharing sounds, sharing words, sharing rhymes, sharing songs, sharing stories, and sharing playtime. But what we need to encourage parents with this is that all their interactions are fun interactions, when the child is eager, when the child is alert. And most important, we have to stress no drilling. I know people have already asked us, what is the basis for our research for the Very Ready Reading Program? Well, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Every Child Ready to Read project from ALA. And we have considered that same research, which is very valid and highlights, as the Very Ready Reading Program does, the importance of parental involvement. I was one of the American Library Association's 6 original trainers for the first edition of the Every Child Ready to Read. I've been doing some training also in the second edition, so I am very well versed with that project. These 2 programs, the Very Ready Reading Program and Every Child Ready to Read, are actually complementary. They have 2 specific different goals. The Every Child Ready to Read project was designed purposely as an outreach project for us to reach out to people who weren't already coming into our library doors. It provided curriculum and materials for workshops that librarians can present to parents and to caregivers. The Very Ready Reading Program is designed for librarians to present age-appropriate story times, or this manual can also be used by early childhood educators to present effective circle times. Our main emphasis in the story times is to provide tips for parents to continue literacy interactions at home on a daily basis. Now, another organization that we considered a research for is the 0 to 3 organization, which supports parents and professionals to improve the lives of both infants and toddlers. And there is a wealth of information at their website. 3 of their principles that we have also taken into consideration are language, reading, and writing skills develop at the same time and are intimately linked. Early literacy development is a continuous developmental process that begins in the first years of life. And thirdly, early literacy skills develop in real-life settings through positive interactions with literacy materials and with other people. You know, some of the information that 0 to 3 has presented that I am really, would really recommend are the early literacy behaviors that they recommend for infants and toddlers. And they have based a lot of that on the research of Judith Schickendanz, who did a book a lot of you might be familiar with, which is called Much More Than the ABCs. If you've not seen it, just recently released this year is a new edition called So Much More Than the ABCs. And I highly recommend that every librarian look at that because it's fabulous for early literacy behaviors of infants and toddlers. Another organization, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, of course, is the organization, it's the world's largest organization actually, that works on behalf of young children ages 0 to 8, and they have nearly 80,000 members. Two of their statements that we looked at very closely, one is their position statement called Learning to Read and Write, Developmentally Appropriate Practices for Young Children, and a joint position statement that the NAEYC did with the International Reading Association, which is called Developmentally Appropriate Practice in Early Childhood Programs Serving Children from Birth through Age 8. While I'm speaking about the International Reading Association, you know, they have over 900 articles that they have published on early literacy. And they also did their own position statement in 2005 titled Literacy Development in the Preschool Years. The final organization that we carefully looked at their research is Reading Rockets, which is a national multimedia literacy initiative. And they also have tons of early literacy information and tools which are specifically for parents and for librarians. This brings me to our 7 days, 7 ways principles. Here they are. Let's start with sharing books. Now, I'm only going to highlight 1 or 2 things under each one of these. We have, of course, a lot more information under each, but I'm only going to highlight 1 or 2 things. So we'll start with sharing books. When I was doing research to get my master's in early childhood education, I did my thesis on, not hard to guess, early literacy. And one of the things that the research kept showing over and over and over again was that for children to become successful in learning to read, there had to be 3 things in place. And those 3 things are reading books to children from birth and the continuing to read books to children, to have reading materials in the home, that's number 2, and the third thing was that the parent would be a reading model. So in other words, the parents would show that they enjoy reading. And those 3 things are really vital. One of the things we recommend under the sharing books is how important it is, particularly for the ages of the infants and the young toddlers, how important it is to read several books at different times during the day. It doesn't matter if you finish the book. I have gone on record, rather publicly, that the Rosemary Wells book, Read to Your Bunny, I think it had a wonderful premise, a wonderful idea, but in the back of the book she encourages parents to sit down with their baby and to read aloud every day for 20 minutes. Well, that's a nice lofty goal, but not every baby is going to be able to sit in the arms of a parent and listen for 20 minutes. So I kind of like Jane Yolen's book, which is called Baby Bears Books, which talks about the importance of reading throughout the day. It might be a minute here, 2 minutes there, 3 minutes. You know, maybe it ends up being 20 minutes one day, maybe it ends up being 10 minutes, maybe it ends up being 35 minutes. But the importance is spacing it out throughout the day. Let's move on to sharing sounds. We thought this is very, very important for the babies and toddlers, and we really wanted to emphasize this in our first manual as one of the 7 principles. Sharing sounds, there's often a rhythm to the sounds a baby makes, and she may repeat those rhythmic sounds just like a melody. So if parents or caregivers sing along with the baby, once they detect the rhythm and sounds, it'll be a great way to communicate with the child. We encourage parents to make different sounds, have the child repeat them, and make sure the baby can see your mouth and how you're actually making that sound. Let's move on to sharing words. This is another thing. When I was getting my master's in early childhood, I had to go out and observe centers, and I was amazed at how many people would simply diaper the children in a child care center and not say a word to them. You know, when we're diapering babies or feeding babies, it's a wonderful time to talk to the baby and have those verbal or vocal interactions throughout the day. Parents can expand their children's vocabulary, their young children's vocabulary, by describing objects that interest them or things they're looking at. For example, if they see a dog, instead of saying dog, they can say, look at that big white dog with brown spots, and oh my gosh, he has pointed ears. So they're, you know, encouraging more vocabulary that way. Sharing rhymes. Well, we love to use lap rhymes, hand and finger rhymes, toe and foot rhymes, and bounce rhymes in our Storytime programs. And it's wonderful to encourage parents to continue those interactions at home on a daily basis. But, you know, sometimes they forget some of these familiar rhymes. So, you know, it's great to have them come to story times and hear, you know, pat a cake and this little piggy, or I Winker, Tom Tinker, or Trot Trot to Boston, where we're lifting the child up and down in their lap. And I think it's important to encourage them, like I said, to continue this at home. Now here's one that you might not have thought about a whole lot, sharing stories. Of course we know the importance of sharing books, but what about sharing stories? You know, you don't have to read a book to tell a good story. You can make up stories about, parents can make up stories about what they're doing during the day, or something that happened to the child, or they can tell family stories. They can make up stories while riding in a car, or pushing the stroller to the park. They can also use the child's favorite baby doll or stuffed animal to act out stories that they have made up, or even stories they have read in books. Sharing songs. Songs, we know, are great for phonological awareness. But one of the things we have to be very cautious on for very young children is singing them a tad slower, which is why we often recommend not to use a lot of recorded music for the baby Storytime programs. Having them a little bit slower will help young children clearly hear the words and perhaps even the syllables that make up the words in the song. This will help young children to discriminate sounds, which of course is a skill that's necessary for learning to read. And just like repeated readings of familiar books are good for kids, so is singing the same songs over and over. You know, it helps young toddlers learn the words, and it also builds their memory skills. Finally, sharing playtime. Of course, this is still a controversial statement. There's been some things released just in the last month about this, but the American Academy of Pediatrics still does discourage any television viewing for children under the age of 2. So what do they recommend in place? They recommend lots of interactive play with parents, with caregivers. You know, we can encourage parents to provide play experiences and materials that will allow their child to use all 5 of their senses. That, of course, will help their brain development. And using their 5 senses, like water play, sand play, these things are very, very important for young children. At this time, I want to turn this webinar over to Dr. Pam Schiller. And I am sure many of you have heard of her. I am sure many of you have her books in your library collections. I'm only going to mention 2 that I think you might have heard of. Where is Thumbkin? And Do You Know the Muffin Man? And Pam's going to start us off on brain development.
Thank you, Sue. As you mentioned, we did base the Very Ready Reading program on 2 areas of research, the neuroscience research, commonly known as brain research, and early literacy development research. So let's take a look at a few of the findings from neuroscience research that suggest effective ways that we can interact with children for early literacy development. The first slide that we're looking at here is windows of opportunity. The windows of opportunity are timetables. They tell us exactly when specific things are wiring in the brain. The windows are scientific research from neurological scientists all across the planet. We know exactly when we have an optimum time for wiring, which is the first column here that you are looking at where it says wiring opportunity. And please do notice that these wiring opportunities are all domains. They're emotional, social, cognitive, physical, and language. The brain wires from birth until death in domains. All of our academic things like science and social studies and reading, all of those are outshoots of what we've managed to build as a foundation during early brain development. The brain is extremely pliable and flexible, has a great deal of plasticity from birth until puberty. But at puberty, the hormones that come with puberty signal the brain to prune away unused circuitry, and we are left, for better or for worse, with the working brain we're going to have for the rest of our life. So what we want to do in this very early part of early brain development wiring is wire for positive and optimum outcomes for young children. So in this first column where you see the wiring opportunity, this is where you will get the optimum wiring. Positive experiences will result in positive outcomes. Negative experiences will result in negative outcomes. The optimum wiring happens in this very short window. So in the case of emotional intelligence, you see there 0 to 48 months. But we have the chance to come back and fix anything that we didn't get correct all the way up until puberty. Now, what you see there on that first window, let's take emotional intelligence as an example. And let me again say that these windows are chronological. It doesn't matter if you're born with a developmental delay or if you're born premature. It doesn't matter where you're born on the planet, Australia, Africa, or right here in the United States. The windows are the same. What opens them is birth. The minute that child is born, the clock begins to tick. So from 0 to 48 months, we need to lay the foundation there for emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence has two very specific building blocks. The first one is trust. So given back to what I said about positive experiences will result in positive outcome and negative outcomes, let's look at trust for a minute. In that first 14 months of life, if the baby cries and someone comes, if the baby's hungry and somebody feeds it, if the baby's sick and someone comes and cares for it, those are all positive experiences that lead that baby to learn to trust. However, if the baby cries and no one comes, or it's sick and no one takes care of it, it's hungry and nobody feeds it, those are negative experiences. And the brain is wiring, like it or not, so those negative experiences then will result in negative outcomes. So now let's just say that child is 17 months old and they've never wired for trust. They've actually wired for the opposite, lack of trust. Can we fix it? Yes. Is it difficult? Yes, because now we're outside that very fertile window, and we've also got a whole lot of wiring already established. We have super highways, super neurological connections all over the brain that have wired for lack of trust. And so now we have to be there right this minute, every second with that child to offer the opposite, the positive experiences, so that we can create wiring that is significantly more secure and more highly myelinated in the brain than the wiring that we have created for lack of trust. And when we do finally get that wiring established, it will never, ever be the optimum wiring that it could have been had we wired it in that first 14 months. That's why it is so very, very critical that we know the windows and understand the windows and shape experiences for children that meet the positive outcomes that we want. You will notice how much of what you're looking at here, and we're getting ready to change slides in a second, but you will notice how much of the wiring is laid between 0 and 3. 80% of the brain is wired by age 3. By age 5, 90% of the brain will be wired. So let's now take a look at what that means when we look at early reading skills here on our next slide as we continue this chart. With the reading skills, the reading foundation skills, you will notice that it's from 0 to 24 months that those foundation skills will wire. That's right in this infant-toddler period of time. The early sounds, the sounds of language, wire in the very first year of life between the 4th and 8th month. And during this period of time, we want to be sure we speak, 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 and read, 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 and sing, 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 because there will be a neurological community wired in the brain for every sound in the child's native language. So in the case of English, that's 44 phonemes that we have, which means there will be 44 neurological communities wired in the brain, one neurological community for every sound in that child's native language. The brain is so absolutely fertile to sound during this period of time that if someone spoke 10 different languages to that child on a consistent basis during that first year of life, that child would wire neurological communities for the sounds in all 10 languages. And later when they learned to formally speak the languages, they would be able to do so without accent or dialect. That's how very fertile the brain is to that early sound recognition in that first year of life. Vocabulary, 0 to 24 months, is going to give that child a head start for the rest of their life. If a child is around a chatty caretaker during the first 18 months of life, that child will have 181 more words than a peer that was not around someone who was more talkative. If by age 2, that child that's been around someone chatty will have 295 more words than a peer that wasn't around someone chatty. And by the time that child enters public school kindergarten, the child that's been around a family and caretakers who have spoken to the child and been chatty, that child will have 1,500 words more than a peer. That is a terrible thing when we send children off to school with one child having 1,500 words more available to him than another child might have. When I said the windows were all open to puberty, I need to go back and mention that vision is the only window that is not open. We have from 0 to 24 months to get the wiring established for vision. Babies don't really see 20/20 till about the 25th month of life, but from that point on, vision cannot be corrected up to puberty. It can be enhanced, but it cannot be corrected. So you can see how important the windows are, and you can see how we used, with all the things that Sue just talked to you about, the 7 ways that we share information with children. You can see how much we put into the early sounds and vocabulary. Let's take a look at 2 things that we use very specifically in this program. One is singing, and I love that. This is one of my favorite strategies with children because it's joyful. And children are in a period of their life where everything should be joyful. Childhood is a time of joy, and we oftentimes overload children with stresses that take some of that joy away. So singing is one of the small things we can do to make sure that we're keeping that joy alive and well. And look at all the research findings about singing. It increases your oxygen level, which makes you more alert. It enhances your memory because when you sing, you feel good. And when you feel good, you have endorphins released into the brain that act as a memory fixative. If the song has cross-lateral movements that take the limbs on one side of the body and cross the midline, which is your nose to your navel. So if you're crossing that midline area, you energize your left and your right hemisphere to converse with each other effectively. Your left hemisphere is paying attention to detail. Your right is paying attention to the big picture. And there's nothing you do, not any task you could name to me right now, that you don't do more effectively when both hemispheres are participating equitably in the activity. Singing also provides a time for transition. It takes 7 minutes for the brain to transition. It's like fine-tuning on a television or a radio until the brain gets all of the gets used to the lighting in a room and the temperature in the room and how close they might be sitting to somebody and so on and so forth. It's still fine-tuning itself, and while it's doing that, it's hard to pay attention to anything that's too detailed. So singing is something we can do that allows time for that transition period to take place. Singing also follows the same pattern the brain does when it's processing. As the brain processes information, it's constantly looking for patterns. How is this new information like something I already know? And because singing falls into a pattern of either rhyming words or a predictable line or a predictable verse, it gets right in sync with the way the brain processes new information. And then, of course, I hope that all of us will always be thinking about how we can use singing to support literacy skills. When you sing Itsy Bitsy Spider, do you stop and make sure that children know what a water spout is? Because that's an unusual word, and not every child will know that's a gutter, and many children will make a misconception if we don't stop and define that word. So for singing, we want to be sure that we sing several times a day, that it's a routine, that we do use it as a springboard to literacy, and you will do that if you're intentional, if you stop and think of a way to connect activities with the songs that you sing or vocabulary or rhyming words and so on. Now let's take a look at language. Here's the 2 research findings about language. Number 1, learning to read is built on the same or very similar neural pathways as learning to speak. So if children are proficient communicators, very generally they are also successful readers. So what do we want to do with that? We want to make sure that we read to children every day, that we make it cozy, that we make it joyful. Remember, what you are feeling comfortable with and what you enjoy, you have those endorphins that help you have a better memory. We want to focus on building vocabulary. We want to be sure that we are providing examples of vocabulary and that we are also giving non-examples. So if I'm going to tell children I want them to use their helpful hands, they'll all shake their head, yes, they want to use helpful hands, but if they don't know what helpful hands are because I haven't given them some examples, then they may not be very successful. So I want to give examples, and I want to give non-examples. What are examples of hands that aren't helpful? I also want to be careful when I'm doing vocabulary that I'm thinking always about including verbs. Most people are very good about defining nouns for children, but often forget that verbs also often need some kind of definition. And most of the time, the great thing about verbs is they can be acted out. We also want to play with the sounds of language. We want to use lots of rhyming words and lots of rhythm and onomatopoeia, which you may have forgotten what that means, but onomatopoeia are words that sound like the sounds they're trying to describe, like pitter-patter goes the rain and swoosh goes the wind and moo goes the cow. All right, so Sue, back to you.
Thank you, Pam. One of the things that I love about our Very Ready Reading Program manual is the number of reproducibles we have. They're already done for you. All you have to do is take them out of the manual, or you can actually download them also from a site and just lay them down in the photocopier and make copies. And I think that's a strength of this project. I want to mention a couple of the reproducibles we have. We have one called 20 Ways to Raise a Book-Smart Baby, Early Literacy Experiences for Babies and Toddlers. We have another one called Why Share Books with Babies and Young Toddlers, 10 Powerful Reasons. A third one, 25 Tips for Sharing Books with Babies and Young Toddlers. And then one that you're looking at now, which is actually a shorter version. For example, if you think you have a group of people that 25 tips might be an awful lot for them to digest, then maybe you'll want to use the shorter version, which is this one. This one actually has 7 things listed on tips for sharing books. And so again, this is going to be a reproducible that you can just photocopy. Now, under each one of these things, there's just a few brief sentences, and I'm just going to highlight maybe one thing under each. So sharing books every day. Again, I want to emphasize the idea for the very young children. It might just be short periods of time at playtime, bath time, nap time, bedtime, on outings, whatever. Have fun. That's important too, to keep book sharing times fun so that the child learns that books and reading are enjoyable. Talk about the story and the pictures. You know, when the young toddler can start speaking, we want to ask those simple questions about the story, have them identify familiar objects in the book. Help your child learn how a book works. When your child becomes accustomed to book sharing, we can start introducing some simple concepts about books and print. For example, which side of the book should be up, which is the front of the book, how do we turn pages. We want to show things like print is read from, we read from left to right, and we read from the top to the bottom. And those squiggly little lines in the page are actually words. They have some kind of meaning. Make the story come alive. There is research out there that I always hate to quote because we say how important it is, just read your child, read your child, read your child. But there's research out there that shows how a parent or caregiver or grandparent reads to the child makes a difference. That reading alone is not enough. It has to, the parent has to be expressive and really enjoy the story and be enthusiastic about it. And they can make it personal that way too, which is another thing. After reading the book, you know, you can make it personal about talking about your family or your pets, whatever. And finally, a few minutes is okay. It doesn't matter if we finish a story in one sitting. Babies and young toddlers may listen for only a few minutes, and that is quite fine. Another thing that is in this first manual that we're talking about, and will be in the subsequent manual 2 and 3, are recommended books by ages. I teach graduate library school students at Kent State University, and my class is Books, Materials, and Programs for Very Young Children. And they must do 100 annotations of books. And when they're doing them for babies and toddlers and preschoolers, one of the things I ask them that has to be part of their annotation is, why are you recommending that book for that age? Give me the reasons why. I know they hate me for this, but I want them to understand that each child is developing, there's certain developmental characteristics, and because of that, there are certain types of books that are going to be good at certain ages or more appropriate for certain ages. So we're going to talk now about the books, recommended books for birth through 12 months. And there are 5 categories I want to highlight here that are really good books for these very, very young children, newborns up to 12 months. One is high contrast books. Those are those books that have a high contrast of colors like black and white. Why are these important? Well, the very first few months, we know that that child's vision is kind of blurry or kind of fuzzy. So by having high contrast books, they can start focusing on the various objects. Touch and feel books, that's again important for brain synapses, the touching and the feeling of the objects in the book. Third, baby face books. I always recommend that we choose some baby face books that show babies from various ethnic groups. Fourth, point and say books. You know, there's a lot of point and say books out there for babies, and you know, we have to kind of model to parents how to share them. You know, how boring it would be if you would just point to each page and say something like cup, ball. You know, and that's sort of what it looks like when you look at these point and say books. What we need to encourage parents to do is to identify the object, possibly identify the color, and then put a little sentence, make it into a little sentence. We're sharing more vocabulary that way. Of course, when they get older and they can talk, then we can point to the object and they can actually say the word. And then finally, rhyme and song books. Of course, those are important, you know, the whole way up through the preschool years. But I think when we think about the rhyme and song books here, I'm talking a lot about the nursery rhyme books and some of the nursery song books. So let's look at just very, very briefly a couple of the books we have recommended in our Very Ready Reading program. Here's a series by Peter Linenthal, and he has several in his series. They're all good for those very first few months of life. We have the black and white, high contrast images, just a little touch of green there also. So that would be good for a high contrast book. The touch and feel books, I hope you're familiar with this series that's published by Usborne. They have these touchy-feely books. There's tons of them in this series, and they're really nice because babies can touch and feel the various objects. I only caution you, whenever you buy books at your library that have these surfaces, make sure they're not something that's going to fall off in the child's hand or come off the page easily, because if it does, it's obviously going to go in their mouth and they could actually, you know, gag or, you know, not be able, you know, they try to swallow the object, for example, which is one of the reasons that very, very, very early Pat the Bunny, which unfortunately I guess I would say is still a classic, it has, you know, like different things that can literally come off the pages. They have made some new editions that are a lot better, but I'm talking about that very original one with that spiral binding is really not so appropriate for babies after all. So that's a good touch and feel. Then we have baby face books. And some of the ones I'd like to recommend, there's so many by Margaret Miller, of course, but this is a series, if you're not aware of, the Global Fund for Children have some wonderful baby face books. This one is American babies. They actually have global babies, and they have one that just came out February of this year called Global Baby Girls. Now, whether they're going to have a global baby boys, I don't know, but they have a Global Baby Girls that just came out in February of this year. Okay, here's an older series of books, but I still love them. They're done in English and Spanish by Rebecca Emberley. There were several in that series, My Colors, Mis Colores. Again, a point and say book, you know, if I were pointing to that apple, I would say, look, it's an apple, and this apple is red. You know, apples can be yellow and green too. And Mom uses apples to make you applesauce. So that's an example of how to use how you can model using a point and say book. These are by Child's Play. They're wonderful little rhyme books. Pat a Cake, you know, it has the whole rhyme in the book and kind of how to do it. Okay, let's look at recommended books for 12 to 24 months. Some of the same categories, but some different ones here. For example, peekaboo books. Oh, peekaboo books are wonderful for around 12 months of age. I always give these as gifts, and I always know when parents' child has reached about 1 year old because they'll come to me and they'll say, do you know which book that you gave that my child really likes an awful lot? And I say, yeah, how about Where is Baby's Belly Button? And they're like, how did you know? Well, the way I knew was because their child is around 12 months of age, and that is when a child starts developing object permanence. I think you all know what object permanence is. You know, the object is hidden under a blanket, and you take the blanket away. They think it's hilariously funny. They realize it's still there, and they think that's so funny. So what is a peekaboo book? A peekaboo book, which is good for the 12 months, around the 12 months of age, is simply a flat book. If you think about lifting up the flap and then putting it down again, that's peekaboo, peekaboo. And I recommend that librarians simply put tape down on the hinge before the book circulates, because it will circulate a lot longer. So peekaboo books, interactive books, and touch and feel books, again, wonderful for sensory experiences to increase brain synapses. Again, rhyme and song books, and then we start introducing some simple concept books like colors and numbers. Again, not to drill them, not to force them to learn these things, just to expose them to it. So let's look at some of these books. There's the one I always give as a baby gift, Where is Baby's Belly Button? They have it in a couple different sizes now. They have it in a little board book, and they have it in a large board book, several sizes of that. Nice little flat book. Karen Katz, she's done tons of them. I'm sure you have them in collections. Sarah Gillingham has done a whole series of, I call them little finger puppet books. They're just wonderful little interactive books. You can place your finger in the back of the book, and it will come, you know, be inside that hole you're seeing there. And so on every single page, you can that force around. These are actual finger puppets attached to the book. If that makes sense. There's a whole series of those that I think are just wonderful. We have this is the Touch and Feel book. And this author has done several. It's called I Like Vegetables. It's not, it's great to start introducing vegetables at such a young age. Oh, kids love this book. This actually has a song chip in it. So you can actually play it. It's a teddy bear sing-along book. So you can play the song and be sing along at the same time. By David Elmont, he has a couple books with those song chips in. I just have to read this one because I just love it. What kid is not going to love this book? It's called What Color is Bear's Underwear? Monday, fun day. The undies are red. Tuesday, blue day. Undies on the head. Wednesday undies, Bear is wearing green. Thursday undies, purple ones are clean. Friday undies, yellow like the sun. Saturday undies, orange is #1. Sunday undies, blue, red, and white. Whatever the color, undies are dynamite. Poor young toddler is not going to love that book. And you see little bears undies in every page. Well, we also talked about the importance of sharing playtime. And play is very, very important and very, very underrated by parents, particularly parents who are looking to put their children in daycares. If they see an emphasis on play, they think, oh, that's not a good center, where it could be just the opposite, of course. Play is very important. It supports early brain development, which again is going to increase those brain synapses. It enhances creativity. You know, there is nothing that can enrich a child's vocabulary as much as pretend play. It's fabulous. It encourages imagination. You know, play doesn't have to necessarily mean toys. It can be simple household items. A ruler can be a magic wand. Play builds confidence and self-esteem. It develops attention span, particularly when you're involving those 5 senses and they're involved in sand play, for example. That's really something they're going to want to do. And it's great for the fine-tuning of small and large motor skills. Now, in our first manual that covers 0 up to 24 months, I'm just showing you there's a chart in the manual. I'm only showing you a little section of that chart. It's a really neat chart on play, and we have the children divided by ages. We have birth to 6 months as one category, 6 to 9 months as another category, 9 to 12 months, and then 12 to 24 months. And within each of those categories, there are 3 columns. One column is what activities are good for these months, and that's what you're seeing there. What activities are good for the 9 to 12 months. Then in the next column, you will see objects and toys that are good for those ages. And I like this for a lot of reasons. Some libraries, you know, actually have monies that they can have a couple toys available after a baby Storytime program, and this will give you an idea of what kind of things would be appropriate to purchase if you have monies to purchase that would be great for kids at that age. So that's the second column. The third column is actually some developmental notes, and I think these are really good when we think about planning our programs. Exactly what can a baby do? I mean, what are they developmentally able to do? What can a toddler do? So I think these development notes in the play category are very good also. I want to talk now about these manuals that I keep mentioning. There are actually, there's actually one manual completed now and ready for purchase. And I know some of you sitting out there have already purchased it and maybe even have it in your hands right now as we're doing this webinar. The manual for birth through 24 months, and that is not including 24 months, just up to 24 months. That is completed. In the fall of this year, we will have the manual for 2s and 3s. It will also have Storytime programs in it, but I just want to highlight just a couple of the introductory materials. We're going to have sections on playtime and music time, and one which I hope will be really helpful. What kind of open-ended art is good for 2s and 3s? You know, so many libraries want to just pass out coloring sheets, and we could be doing such a much better job with having some open-ended art activities. So we'll give some ideas for that. The manual for the 4s and 5s will be coming out in winter of 2014. And a highlight I feel in that manual, because I do a lot of speaking around the country, and I have noticed that many libraries are going to mixed age group programs for a lot of reasons, for staffing reasons, or also because patrons are requesting they want all their children to come at one time for a story time. So we'll have some sample programs in there that you could use with a mixed age group. Okay, let's talk about the components of an individual manual. I said there's going to be 3 of them, so let's talk about individually what's inside. Okay, each manual is going to have 20 story time programs. Each manual has introductory and background research. In this first manual, we have wonderful stuff that Pam has done on brain research. We have things on developmental characteristics of children, on language development, and on the role of music and play. There are going to be recommended book lists, and because I had something to do with it, you have to realize there are going to be the whys there, why these books are good for those kids. And those wonderful reproducibles I mentioned before that you can just put down on the photocopier. There is also something I haven't mentioned yet, and that is there's a section on outreach to families who don't already come to our library. If you want to do some outreach, it's going to mention some different groups of people that you can target and ways to reach them. And then we also have a section on working with early childhood educators. What are some services we can provide? What are some types of workshops that you can offer? And another reproducible, because I love those reproducibles, 25 do's to promote early literacy experiences in their individual centers. Hopefully that will help them. That's something that would be good to give to them. All right, so within these 20 Storytime programs, let's talk about them a little bit and how they're in the manual and how they're going to look. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one thing. Let me just backtrack 1 minute. Before I get into the 20 Storytime programs, I forgot to mention that there is also a promotional poster and some bookmarks and parent sharing guides that are part of the program that you will also receive if you would order this program. And as Matt mentioned earlier, all 3 manuals actually are going to include Eric Carle's art because it is so recognizable. Okay, now the 20 Storytime programs, they are thematic, and there's going to be 20 per manual. Now, one of the first things that you will see will be tip sheets for presenters. This is everything that you will need to know to execute the program. Next, there are going to be book suggestions for each theme. Each theme or each story time might have 3 books within the story time, for example. But we're going to give you other books that would be good to use. In case you don't own those 3 or don't own all of them, we'll give suggestions for other books that relate to that theme. And they would also be great to set up for display. You know, if you get out that story time, here's some more books that you can read in this subject. Also, there's going to be 3 activities to go with each theme. Those activities are for libraries that at the end of the story time, sometimes people like to have a little art activity or some type of activity to do with children. We're going to give you 3 activities to go with each theme, and you can choose one to do. I'm really, really pleased with the CD that's going to come. It comes in the manual. The songs that are in the Storytime programs, we actually have recorded on a CD. There are vocals for every single song, and it's a really nice voice you get to listen to. That's important, I think, for vocals for young children. And there also are instrumental versions for some of the songs. We have, on each Storytime program, we have early literacy tips mentioned that you can tell the parents during the story time, and I'll talk about that and show you that momentarily. There is a durable laminated Storytime card that you can have out right in front of you to use when you're doing the Storytime program. And then I think a real key part of our Very Ready Reading program is this take-home reproducible. It's something that you would photocopy. It's going to have the 7 ways to share early literacy skills, of sharing books, songs, rhymes, etc. And it also is going to have the rhymes and the songs that were presented in that Storytime program, so that they can practice them during the week at home. That's vital, because what we're doing in story times is very, very important. But what is more important is what the parents are doing on a daily basis with the kids. So they need to be replicating what we're doing in story time. So by having these take-home reproducibles, they'll be able to do that. I'm going to give you just a little bit of a glimpse. I realize that you're not going to be able to read all this, but I'll point out some things. What you're looking at right now is what would be considered the presenter tip sheet, and this theme was Color My World. You'll see about this story time. You're only seeing a couple books listed. Again, you're only seeing part of this sheet. There'll be a lot more book suggestions there. There will be the songs that we're going to use, and I don't know if you can notice this or not, but there's some little gray boxes there. It's going to show you whether it is an instrumental version or whether it's both vocal and instrumental. The rhymes will also we'll mention the rhymes in the presenter tip sheet, and those 3 activities I told you about that you could do. Color My World, using one of the activities is using colored bean bags. Another is a little project called Moving Color, and another is a sun catcher. Okay, so that's the presenter tip sheet. The next thing you're going to be looking at is just the first part of a story time program. These are those durable cards that I was talking about. What I want to really point out here is that early literacy tip. Now, in the Storytime card, like I mentioned before, there's going to be 3 early literacy tips for each story time. And I tried to make sure, or we tried to make sure, that these were in very, I want to say, conversational language. However, I don't think you necessarily have to read them off to parents. I think it'd be great if you could put that in your own conversational tone and in your own language, I guess I would like to say. The important thing is that we're not lecturing to the parents, that we're just giving them some good little ideas, some good little early literacy tips. And then the last thing I'm going to show you here is the actual reproducible that you would do at the end of the story time. Again, you're only seeing part of it for this Color My World, and what you're seeing are just 5 of the 7. All the 7 things will be mentioned there, but we will be giving parents ideas of what they could do in relation to the theme or just in general for sharing books, sounds, words, rhymes, songs, stories, and playtime. So that, and also in this last sheet, it will also have, and again, you're not seeing this, but it will also have all the songs and all the rhymes that were in that particular story time so that they can replicate the experience at home. Okay, at this time, I am going to turn this back over to Matt, who is going to finish out our webinar today.
Okay, thank you so much, Sue and Pam. That was a tremendous amount of research that went into the program, and it was great to hear you share it with the audience. We've had a lot of questions, and we won't have a chance to get to most of them, but everything we do, we will post, and it will be sent to you. So kind of the next steps, if you're interested in the program, you can visit upstartpromotions.com, and you can just search Very Ready, and that will take you to our landing page, which has all the information about the program, the manual, what's contained in it, and other supplemental materials that you could use as outreach. And there'll also be a download of sample materials such as Sue had shared with you just a few moments ago. So you can take, print out the presenter tip sheet and the story time and the caregiver tip sheet and try the story time, see if it works within your library. We've also heard from some larger district libraries that might be interested in training sessions for the program, and we would be able to provide that as well if you are interested. We'll take a moment to answer at least one question that came in here, and Sue, I'll direct this to you. The question was, if you had just 5 minutes to present to a group of young parents, what would you stress to help build early literacy skills?
I think, well, of course we could stress all our 7 things, but the 3 I would really stress, of course, is the importance of reading to birth, and I would just maybe briefly tell them, show them examples of what books would be good and how to do that, because again, I think a lot of times parents do not know how to share books with very young children. So I would emphasize the importance of that reading, and as I stated earlier, there's 3 things that need to be in every home for a child to be a reader: is reading to the child, having reading materials in the home, and the parent being a reading model. So that's one thing I would stress. I would stress the importance of singing songs. I think, you know, we can't emphasize that enough. I hear of librarians who don't like to sing songs in story times, and I think that's a shame, because it's so important for them to hear the different sounds and words. So I would emphasize the songs, and I would also emphasize talking to the child, you know, and talking to the baby, and sharing vocabulary. I think, you know, that's very important. Those 3 things I would emphasize probably the most.
Okay, unfortunately that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, Sue and Pam, for sharing your research and an overview of the program. We hope you were all able to take away a few ideas to try in your next story time. If you're interested in learning more about the Very Ready Reading Program, visit upstartpromotions.com and search Very Ready. You will be receiving a follow-up email in a couple of days, including a link to this webcast, so you can go back and refresh yourself on some of the topics or share the webinar with some of your colleagues. That email will also include a brief survey. Please take a few moments to complete the survey and help us make future sessions even more beneficial. You'll also receive a recap email in a week or so that will include the questions and answers from today's webinar, as well as links to free sample materials. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.